Welcome everyone to our midweek live stream. Appreciate those who are here tonight, and if you are at home watching, you're fortunate tonight because we have not just one man with shorts on, we've got two men with shorts on, and there seems to be a beauty contest going on. The individuals who are here will be casting their vote before they go home, and we'll crown a queen before we depart tonight, but you're fortunate that you're missing that. I, however, have to speak with that huge distraction. I'm just thankful for the pews that I don't have to, be watching it face on. We're in Proverbs tonight. Appreciate those of you joining us from wherever you are at, and hope that this study of Proverbs is as rewarding to you as it has been to me. And we're going to get into some things about the family tonight, and we're not going to make a whole lot of progress tonight. We're starting the 10th chapter, and I set a really low goal for myself. We're going to try to get through verse 1, but it's got some good stuff there, and it's reminiscent of some other things. But before we do that, I want to buy some time for those that might still be tuning in. Some of what you miss when you're not here for the prayer requests and so on. We've had a missionary trying to get back to Bangladesh for a month now, maybe longer, and 3 times the visa didn't come through, and then 3 times the flight, they would not allow her on the plane because she didn't have a certificate that she was COVID-free within the last, I think it's 24 or no more than 48 hours. But anyhow, long story short, I think everything is in place for her to fly out tonight, Lord willing, and pray with us, if you would, that all things would go well in that regard, and that she would, in fact, be able to fly out tonight and return to her ministry. Another announcement, if you will, speaking of Bangladesh, we've got 2 missionaries laboring in medical missions in Bangladesh. The other one is Stefan Philippi, and he and his wife, whom we haven't met yet, will be coming this coming Lord's Day. And they'll be with us in the morning, and he'll be sharing a little bit about their ministry at night. So we've got that to look forward to. But one other story, we typically, when we take prayer requests, there's always people who have physical needs, and I thought many of you at home would enjoy this story because you know some of our folks here. And some of you may already know this, but Lowell Geyser's been suffering with, we're not sure if it's bursitis or gout, but it's gotten so bad. He went to the doctor, and for Lowell to go to the doctor, it's really serious. So went to the doctor examined him from head to toe, and then he said, if you could go out in the waiting room and send your wife in, I really need to talk to your wife. So Virginia went in, and the doctor said, I've never seen this before, but your husband is in very serious condition, and you need to do the following things. And she stopped him and said, what do you mean? And he said, well, he could die if you don't do what I'm about to tell you to do, and it's going to be a long haul, maybe a month, maybe 2 months, but every morning you got to make sure that he's not aggravated in any way. You give him whatever he wants to eat for breakfast, for lunch, and at night, winding down for bed, it's important he gets at least 8.5 hours of sleep. And when he's winding down, do you have a recliner? And she said, yeah. Get him in the recliner and start at his head, put cucumbers on his eyes and massage his head, work down his spine, because I'm pretty sure this is spinal, have him roll over, work his back all the way down, and then work on his feet, and then give him a big dish of whatever ice cream he wants and put him to bed. Amen. So she went out and got in the car, and Lowell said, what did the doctor tell you? And she looked over and she said, you're going to die. Most of that is not true. It was a funny story, I thought. Anyhow, we're in Proverbs chapter 10. Amy, did you know that we were in Proverbs chapter 10? I didn't think so. Late arrival. Proverbs chapter 10 and verse 1. Just to review where we're at, because this is kind of a transition right here. Chapters 8 and 9 are very, very important chapters in the book of Proverbs. If you haven't been with us They are well worth a listen. They are about wisdom, and they have presented two paths, and that's what this overhead is. By the way, I appreciate the feedback for those of you that have talked about the pictures that we have. Oh, that's not going to work anyhow. I was going to use a PowerPoint, but anyhow, hopefully you can see these pictures at home. I tried to do a better job of the light and dark tonight, and we're going to try to focus on that going forward. But anyhow, two paths are presented, setting one against the other as far as value of heavenly wisdom as opposed to earthly wisdom. And of course, James talks about that, doesn't he? One is earthy and sensual and devilish, and the other is heavenly and it's godly. And that's what we've seen in chapters 8 and 9. These were seen as women. They were portrayed as women competing for the attention of all humans. And we're reminded that folly competes with wisdom in its offer for pleasure, but the path leads to death and to ruin. And you see that at the end of the 8th chapter there as he summarizes. So two types of intelligences were thus compared, because there is an intelligence to folly. It is very, very appealing. The structure of Proverbs here, however, is about to change from these two representative female persons that we've seen in the last two chapters to general wisdom and general foolishness. We could say that all of the Proverbs fall in one of those two categories, speaking generally of godly wisdom or godless foolishness. So here from chapter 10 all the way through the 24th chapter, we're going to see a variety of proverbial sentences. It's going to be very hard to relate these one to the other because there doesn't seem to be an apparent connection with many of them or coherence with each other. Now, Sunday morning, as we do verses 2 through 5 of chapter 10, there's a general idea of finances or wealth, and we're going to look at that subject as these Proverbs are handled. But really, each one of them is a jewel all by itself. And you'll see that tonight in our very first verse. It's perfectly fine for it to stand alone, and there's much to think about in just what it says. But these Proverbs, as we continue on from 10 to 24, they describe the righteous and the wicked, and they set forth their different temper, their different conduct, the different fruit and effects of them. The danger here, I think, in these chapters of Proverbs is to move too quickly. And it's easy to look at a concise saying and to miss the meat of it, if you will. We very often will read Proverbs, but we don't allow enough time for consideration, for that truth to sink in deeply into our hearts and to our minds. So for that reason, we're just going to look at verse 1 of chapter 10. So if you have your Bibles open, verse 1 of chapter 10 says, "The Proverbs of Solomon. A wise son makes a glad father, but a foolish son is the heaviness of his mother." So we have a secondary division within this book, starting here in this 10th chapter, and it is divided by the Proverbs of Solomon. It's like a title, if you will. And we're going to see another such division when we arrive at the beginning of chapter 25. And if you don't have a reference Bible, you can write that cross-reference in. It helps you to understand how the editors compiled these Proverbs or put them together. And when one might expect such a plan or design, organizing these thoughts and sayings, if in fact they are a compilation of Solomon's wisest and most practical sayings. And as we might expect, what we are about to see should strike us as remarkable in both the areas of practical insight and the observance of human inclination. It is amazing to me, in 2,500 years, things have not changed very much. In fact, this is going back even further, 3,000 years. Things have not changed as far as humanity is concerned and our inclinations and the practicality of the things we're being told here. We're at the door of a warehouse of treasure, if you will, concerning human existence, and whether the context is that of the family, which is predominant in the book of Proverbs, or whether it's just simply cultural, or sometimes he even touches upon civil areas of government and society at large. We will simply focus on this just one verse and give you an idea of what can be obtained from deeper thought and reflection. So Solomon begins, here we've got a new section of Proverbs, a collection, and he begins at the beginning. If I were to ask you what this first verse is about, what would you say? What's 10:1 about? Connie Sue, good to see you. They let you out, you on work release. That's great. That's great. Yeah, I haven't seen that lady in a while. What's verse 1 about? Family. 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 When you got husbands, when you got wives, when you got mothers, when you got fathers, that's family talk. It's about the family. And that's the beginning, isn't it? When did family start? When Hillary Clinton ran for office, right? No, when did family start? Genesis. Very, very early on. I mean, opening chapters. It is the first and foremost divine institution. We forget that. Our legislators have forgotten that. They're dealing with a divine institution. Now, what do you think is going to happen when you decide you're going to tweak a divine institution? That you're not going to follow biblical norms, but you think you can make it better. I mean, your motives might be good. We're not impugning anyone's motives. They might really mean well. But if God has said this is the way things are, it's a little bit like getting a new tractor, a new car, a new truck, and you take the owner's manual and say, I don't really need that. I'll just change the oil and the fluids and the hydraulics and the water temperature when I feel like it. When it works for me, that's when I'll do it. We wouldn't do that, would we? But yet we have no compunction about changing family. We have been so bold as to actually even attempt to redefine it in this country. And it is a tragedy, and it's probably going to get worse before it gets better. So we see Solomon going back to Eden. When God made them male and female, the family was in his mind, and he brought the female to the male, made the first wedding, if you will, the first marriage. And so here the concept of connectedness and relation put down roots. I hear that all the time. Both in secular psychology and in psychiatry, people are having a tremendous difficulty these days connecting. They have a difficult time relating. It's a strange thing that has happened in our culture and in our country. Never before have we had such difficulty in connecting and in relating. But we see from Genesis, so the institution of the family, that is the basis of our connectedness and our relation. To the present day, if we wish to express our devotion and love for an individual, we do it through the imagery of family, do we not? We refer to people to whom we are close, that they are as close to us as a brother, as close to us as a sister. He was like a father to me, we say. We use those expressions because we are communicating something very real that most people used to be able to identify with, and I use the phrase used to, because unfortunately there are many people who have not had the experience that we baby boomers have had with regard to family. Soon, however, I fear these universal concepts may elude us in this brave new world we are creating, where society becomes surrogate family, surrogate father, surrogate mother, to the disenfranchised and the faceless crowd. The globalists want to do away with family, and they want to do away with family for the simple reason they understand loyalty. And they understand loyalty to the family supersedes and surpasses everything else. And they will not have themselves be put in the second place. So they want to do away with the family, and then we can be completely loyal and identify totally with the state. And that becomes our family. The importance God places on the family can be observed in the 5th commandment of the Decalogue. Who knows what that is? Oh, they're saying it in unison for those of you at home that can't figure out the Babel sound. Honor thy father and thy mother. It's the only commandment that comes with a promise. And what is the promise? A long life. A long life. And that's in Exodus 20:12. Honor thy father and thy mother. You'll have to let me know, by the way. I tried to use light and dark. You'll have to let me know if you like these pictures any better than the ones from last Lord's Day. Anyhow, honoring one's parents profoundly impacts people. Way more than we give credit to it. We sometimes think that God, in giving commandments, was arbitrary. He's just obviously trying to ruin our good time, and so that's why we have these things. But no. They are all for our benefit and blessing, and there's a purpose even beyond what we might imagine that I want to get into a little bit. This commandment impacts people and culture as it forms the bedrock or the very foundation of personal, individual morality, as well as the law and order of any society. How likely is a person to be a peaceful, law-abiding citizen that does not honor their father and their mother? How likely? We have learned, if you look at the demographics from the prison population, that most of those incarcerated have come from homes where there's no father or no mother and a dysfunctional family. And it deeply, deeply impacts us as human beings. And God knew that. He's the owner, if you will, that wrote the owner's manual. And he's saying you need a father and you need a mother, and they need to have input in your life, and you, as their child, need to honor them and respect them and revere them. A world gone mad is a world where parents have ceased being honored, where they have ceased to influence their children. Now, that's another aspect of this paradigm. There are many parents who are still together, they're still in the home with their family, but they're no longer having meaningful input into the lives of their children. They have other interests, whether it's work or hobbies or just the busyness of life. Kids kind of get lost in the shuffle, rather than being viewed as the responsibility they are, a God-given responsibility. So here's the thing with children, and this may seem rather simplistic, but I think it's warranted. God is invisible. God is invisible. And so when you try to explain that to your children, they have difficulty with that. For children, God has chosen to put parents in the visible place of authority over them. We don't have any kids here tonight, so I'll share this story. I wish I could quote the woman who wrote it, but I think she was writing for a women's Sunday school class, and she was talking about the importance parents have in the lives of their children. And it didn't dawn on her until this happened. She and her husband were talking, and they said, now's the time to tell, our kids the truth about, certain things. So I'm trying to think how this went. It started out that the little girl, her mother said, you know how Santa was really mommy and daddy, and there was no such thing as Santa Claus, and it's really us just giving you presents. Yeah, you know how there's no Easter bunny. It's just mommy and daddy. And I think it was the tooth fairy was what she was leading up to, that there was no tooth fairy. But she told about Santa, and she told about that, and then she said, there's something else I want to tell you about, it's not what you think it is. And she was about to say, mommy and daddy, and the little girl, her little girl said to her, "Are you God? Are you God?" That's a child's perspective, and we think that's kind of foolish and lighthearted. But really, to our children, God intended it that way. We are God to our children. God is invisible. That concept of who God is. We as adults struggle with that, with God. But God made it so that parents can act as His representatives, if you will. And technically, while your child is at home, you are God to your children right now. And if parents want their children to obey God, who they can't see, they've got to start by learning to obey you, who they can see and relate to. The world doesn't honor God. The world doesn't value this commandment. When we watch TV shows, what are most parents like? On the typical TV show, I know a lot of you don't have TV and you don't watch much, and this is one of the reasons you don't watch it. Most parents are morons. Really, they're viewed as people that are too stupid to be cool, and you don't want to be like these people at all. In fact, one of the longest running and most popular, it's a cartoon, but adults watch it. Some of you will know who these individuals are. A father and a mother named Homer and Marge. Homer and Marge do not make you want to respect them. And most TV parents usually come off looking like idiots. And this is what Hollywood programs into your kids from the time they are born. And then we wonder, when they're 13, 14, 15, why they're suddenly rebellious. Why they think you don't know anything. And this big world out there is beckoning to them. That woman that represented the foolishness of this world. Even when we see respect towards parents, it's more of a what can I get out of this type of attitude. Like the bumper sticker, some of you maybe have seen this, honor your parents, they haven't written their will yet. Not a good reason to honor mom and dad. But honoring parents basically teaches children how to treat God. Don't forget that. God has entrusted you with that task, that responsibility. Honoring parents basically teaches children how to treat God. And there is a principle here. Most of you are familiar with Galatians 6:7. Be not deceived. God is not mocked. For whatsoever a man sows, that shall he also reap. And there is no illustration that hits closer to home than the time and energy we put into our children and then what we get back out. The example that you set is how you relate and deal with your parents. That is one your children will probably follow. And we don't think about that either. They're watching how grandpa and grandma are treated by their mom and dad. This is generational. We cut a groove in our children by the way we treat our parents. The English philosopher John Locke said this. This is pretty neat. And so John Locke was, he knew a little bit about math and medicine, and he was mostly known as a philosopher, 17th century. He said this, parents wonder why the streams are bitter when they themselves have poisoned the fountain. And he was talking about kids. It has been my experience. There's always the rebellious child, but many times we tend to give the child way more credit than they're due. Many times it's a father or a mother that has fouled up. And as John Locke would put it, poisoned the fountain, and then we complain that the stream is bitter. We make a mistake to think honor simply means to obey. While it means that, there are extra things to think about. To honor means to strengthen. It means to give weight to recognize the influence. It is not humiliating. If we're honoring someone, we're never going to humiliate them. Honor your parents by obeying them. Paul said, children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. I can remember, Virginia will remember the Gervins family. I think that was the first verse Dave had Amy memorize. When she was just, 3 or 4, just able to speak. She knew Ephesians 6, children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. And then it goes on, verse 2. It's based on the Decalogue, honor your father and your mother. You've got to make your child do this. It's very, very important. Honor means more than obey, but obey is a really great place to begin. Obviously, if they're not obedient, and of course this could mean their life. I think it's in Growing Kids God's Way. The guy uses the illustration. If you're on one side of the street, your child is on the other, and you tell them to stop, would they stop? Because their lives might depend on it at some point in their life. They were really big, correct me if I'm wrong, John, first-time obedience. First-time obedience. How many parents have that expectation of their children these days? That when you tell them something, you're not going to repeat it 4, 5, or 6 times, or increase your volume, or have to make threats in order to get them to obey. These are all mistakes that we make. So you have to make your child obey, and you have to be very careful in what you are asking them to do. You don't want to be frivolous or careless with that responsibility and power that you as a parent have. If you fail to make your child honor and obey you, it is like letting them play in the road. And it is very, very dangerous. You're setting them up for problems and frustrations for the rest of your life, for the rest of their life. If you fail to keep them inside the fence that God has set up, and that's what he's done, you're going to be causing all kinds of unnecessary pain. By keeping children under your authority, you teach them how to live in society in a responsible way. And frankly, I think that's the root of many of the problems we're seeing now in our culture and in our world. Withhold not correction. This is from Proverbs 23. We're going to be getting to it. Withhold not correction from the child, for if thou beatest him with a rod, he shall not die. People love to find fault with that. And non-Christians, they'll say Christianity is cruel. I love that picture of the lady. I don't know if you can see that, but all three of the kids are crying, even though one is getting the beating. And you might say, oh, they're kind of young to be getting hit. A couple things I want to point out here. First of all, you should never strike your child with your hand. And that verse points that out, doesn't it? Use a rod. You want your hand to be friendly. And by the way, the same goes for training a puppy. You don't want to use your hand. You use the rod. You use, this woman's using an old shoe, which I think would be pretty effective. It's pretty amazing. But corporal punishment anymore, boy, it's like so frowned upon. And if you try to do it out in the world, odds are you're going to get turned in for child services. And, I know it's a minefield out there. And I won't mention names, but I know lots of families who have a whole protocol that they follow. If a child, and it's usually, a younger child, if they've done something wrong, they are sent to a certain place, whether it's their room, the parents' room, the den, the library, whatever. Go there and wait, and dad will be in to talk to you about what happened. And so an explanation is made, what the wrong was, what was said, what was done, and here's what's going to happen. And then, instead of putting the child over the knee, which is still pretty popular in John Wayne movies anyway, the person would just have them lean over a chair, lean over the bed, and, give them a few whacks until there's some tears. And then you know that you've gotten to the child's spirit. And there's a whole, I could go down a whole trail there. Most parents, it breaks their heart to do this. And I think about God. I don't think he takes any pleasure at all in correcting us. I really don't. But he knows it's the only way we're going to learn some things. It's a funny thing about humans. It's only the hard lessons that we remember. Really, it is. If something comes too easy to us, we're apt to forget. And we're apt to make a terrible blunder and mistake later on. So I know that these verses from Proverbs 23 are not real popular in the day and age in which we live, but they are sound. And it's good logic for child rearing. And obviously, we're not advocating, leaving marks on your child or doing something that is going to be injurious to anything other than their spirit and their willingness to be obedient. Parents are honored when their advice is taken. If you are looking at Proverbs 10:1, wise son makes a glad father, and you should have a cross-reference of 13:1. 13:1 says a wise son heeds his father's instruction. A wise son heeds his father's instruction, because the question might arise when you're looking at 10:1, a wise son makes a glad father. Well, what is a wise son? A wise son is one that's been listening to his dad. And that's what Solomon has been doing in these opening chapters. He's been appealing to his children as a father, wanting the best for his children. And so that's wisdom. And this is particularly true when a child is in his or her teen years. Parents of teens point to this commandment often. A veteran father said this to me once. I think this is pretty neat. That there's nothing wrong with teenagers, that reasoning with them will not aggravate. Yeah, you got to think about that one a little bit. Have you noticed that your teen can be unreasonable? Someone once said to me, if you try to argue with somebody that's reached their conclusion illogically, you'll never be able to argue them out of that position using logic. And teenagers are notorious for their illogic. And so odds are, parent, when you try to reason, it'll only aggravate them. Another one said, insanity is contagious. You can catch it from your kids. I don't know if you've ever had that experience, but I've counseled parents who have. These are all comical, but a rebellious teen, not so funny. So now here's the $64,000 question for you. Who recalls the Mosaic remedy for an obstinate, rebellious, and troublesome child? Stoning. Now, if corporal punishment spins your propeller, stoning and capital punishment for a rebellious child, wow, that is really extreme. But you know, that's human nature, isn't it? There are going to be some kids, really, and it has nothing to do with genetics, has nothing to do with, you know, you're being a good parent, bad parent. There are some kids that, unless that is held over them as an ultimate, and I'm going to give you a parallel to it in just a moment, they're not going to listen. They're not going to listen. What do you do? And most parents have played this little scenario out. What do you do when your child ultimately refuses to do what you've asked them to do? What do you do? What is your ace in the hole? You're going to grab a gun and threaten to shoot them? What are you going to do? I've had that happen in my churches. People have come. I got a 15, 16, 17-year-old, maybe even an 18, 19-year-old still living at home, still getting all the benefits of dad and mom's insurance and food and laundry and, you know, everything given to them, but they're not going to do what mom and dad want them to do. What do you do? And these are tough questions. And boy, all of a sudden, whether we love God or our child comes right to the forefront right now. Are we going to cave? Or are we going to do what God tells us to do? Let me give you a current case. How many of you know who Claudia Conway is? Nobody? This is exciting. You know her mom. This is Claudia. Claudia is 15. Teens always know best in the current culture and social climate that we find ourselves in. Teens always know best. They are way smarter. Now, if you don't know her mom, she works in the White House. But she's given her notice. She's given her notice because of her teenage daughter. Kellyanne Conway is her mom, and her daughter became popular on TikTok for her anti-Trump videos. So she started, and I don't know if you know Kellyanne's husband, George. They are divided politically. They're kind of a conundrum. But by the way, both Kellyanne and George have both resigned from what they're doing. They both said to work on their family. This 15-year-old girl, who probably should have been, I probably shouldn't say this because it's going out over the airwaves. She should have been knocked in a corner a long time ago, probably a decade ago. But anyhow, Kellyanne made her delete her social media. Can any of you imagine a fate worse than that? I mean, why I can't believe that. Delete my social media? By the way, that might be a good test to go home and ask your team, if I asked you to do this, would you do that? Would you just have none of it if I asked you to shut it down? Would you do that? I'm just suggesting. I'm a real troublemaker tonight, aren't I? Anyhow, so Kellyanne's announced she's leaving her job to focus on her family. So this is what her 15-year-old wrote to all of her. She's got 43,000 followers. She said, "The power I hold." Now, I'm not a prophet, but unless this girl's attitude changes, her life will be one huge disaster. She's talking about her parents. The power I hold. So I didn't have a whole lot of respect for George Conway to begin with, but now I've got zero. A man that can't control his 15-year-old, son or daughter, doesn't deserve my respect. And then she said, they think this is going to stop me from getting emancipated. Now, if you're not familiar with emancipation, if your child is 15 or 16 in many states, they can become independent of you. They can go to court and say, Your Honor, you know, they're making me delete my social media. They're not giving, me the money that I want to go to the school that I want to go to. They're telling me who I can see and who I can't see. I need to be free. And guess what? The judge is going to say, you're free. You don't have to listen to them anymore. So people come to the pastor and they say, what am I going to do, Pastor? What am I going to do? So I'll tell you in case you're ever tempted to come. It'll save us both a whole lot of time. Dad has to have the talk. And it can be brief or it can be long. And you sit them down, you say, you know what? We love you. We enjoy you. Your mother and I are the family. And when God gave you to us, we welcomed you in. We knew you wouldn't be staying forever, that one day you'd be leaving and have a family of your own. And we would have preferred it to be God's way so that I could look out for you, take care of you. But we cannot tolerate your disrespect, your dishonor. And if you want to be free, you can be free. So we will be distancing ourselves. You are now responsible for yourself, all of your bills, all of your food, all of your clothing, all of your shelter, all of your transportation, your insurance. You're responsible for everything. And by the way, some kids have actually gone to court to try to get payments, monthly payments. If I were in that situation, I would move to another state. I would do that rather than enable a godless lifestyle. But that might sound really harsh, but to me, that's the equivalent of stoning. A pair of Hebrew parents who had a child that was as rebellious as some that we see today, that was their recourse. They could bring them to the judges and say, our child is rebellious and stubborn. They refuse to listen. And they would be put to death. The elders would pass a sentence of death upon them. Now, you have to think about that. I mean, we talk about our God being loving and merciful, and those who are lost look at that and say, well, that can't be right. But here we are coming face to face with a rebellious, sinful, exceedingly sinful nature of sin, of wickedness, of evil, and of rebellion. And so parents have to literally tell their 15, 16-year-old, you want to choose your own way, you can, but we will not enable you any longer. If ever you want to come back, we can talk about that. But right now, the terms and conditions, you're not meeting them. And we're going to miss you. You need help packing. Sobering thought. I remember Melody's younger brother, and if any of her family is watching, I apologize for sharing family secret, but it's not really a secret. Do you remember when Orrin ran away? It was really funny. Orrin announced he had it with the family. He was leaving. So guess what his mom did? She said, you're going to get hungry. I'll pack you a sandwich. And she gave him a suitcase. And so, boy, all of his words then, he had to pack the suitcase. So we watched him. It was pretty funny. He went out to the edge of the yard and reluctantly went out the gate and hung around by the fence. We watched him there for, I don't know, he was out there for 2 or 3 hours. Supper time, he came in. And nobody ever said, I think one of the brothers might have said, hey, Orrin's back. That's great. That was it. Yeah, so I'm thinking Orrin, while he was out there by that fence, did some thinking. And maybe some 15, 16-year-olds need to do some thinking. We tend to think such conflicts are something new, but they're not. This is amazing to me. Human nature has not changed. The provision in the Mosaic Law and other excerpts from history tell a very common story. An astute philosopher said this. Listen to this. This is amazing. Our youth now love luxury. They have bad manners, contempt for authority. They show only disrespect for their elders. They love to chatter in place of exercise. They no longer rise when elders enter the room. They contradict their parents, babble before company, gobble up their food, and tyrannize their teachers. Well, guess who said that? Socrates, 2,500 years ago. Socrates was a wise man. He also said when debate is lost, slander becomes the tool of the loser. With this being an election year, I thought you needed that as well. Anyhow, things have not changed. They have been the same for millennia. God established the family to be the primary child-rearing and human nurturing institution. Parents are duty-bound to know and carry out divine principles in their homes for the sake of their children and society. And the fact that America is the way it is today tells us that we have not been doing a very good job. Oddly enough, the fifth commandment, I don't know if you ever thought about this, it's addressed to children and not parents. Honor thy father and thy mother. Have you ever thought about that? He didn't address it to dad and mom. He didn't say, parents, be kind. Parents, be sensitive. Parents, be generous and thoughtful towards your children. He didn't say that. He said, honor your father and your mother. You see, you and I choose neither our parents nor the environment in which we grow up. And yeah, I know there's lots of sad stories out there. I know lots of people who have not been as blessed as I have been and others have been. We may be raised in circumstances where respect comes easy. Or maybe we were raised in circumstances where respect is extremely difficult. In fact, I know some adults that still struggle with that. Some parents are easy to honor. Others are very difficult, but we can choose to honor our parents. We can choose to do that. Fathers, provoke not your children to wrath, in case you were thinking of that. Parents are addressed in the New Testament, but notice it says, bring them up in the nurture and admonition of the Lord. You see, everyone is accountable to God. The fifth commandment is addressed to children, but yes, dad and mom are accountable too, and yes, God is a God of righteousness and judgment, and he will judge everybody for how well they perform their part of the equation. This background brings us back to Proverbs 10:1 and the proverb regarding parents and children. Why do fathers, you ready? 10:1, why do fathers get to be glad while mothers get stuck with a heaviness? Some of you mothers have probably wondered that. Could God be recognizing the inequities inherent in child rearing? Let me ask you a question. In your home, who has more contact day to day? Who does most of the disciplining, moment by moment, day to day? And you know the answers to those things, right? These are rhetorical questions from my perspective. Are parents more lax now than, say, 40 years ago? 50 years ago? What is the most difficult aspect of disciplining a child? I want your feedback on this one. And I know my time is gone. We're going to wind down here pretty quickly. What's the most difficult aspect of disciplining a child?
Punishment.
What about punishment?
It's hard on both parties.
It's hard. Pain, the pain of the process for everybody. Good. What else? Anybody ever had trouble with consistency? Those of you that have more than one child? And the circumstances? Do you feel sometimes you need the wisdom of Solomon? And then the kids are going to be really good lawyers. They will remind you exactly what happened, exactly who said what, who did what you did a decade ago, and what is deserved on this instance. And they will make their case. And you need to be consistent and not be disciplining out of... the individuals I know that would tell their children to go to a separate room, they did not only for the benefit of the child, but for their own benefit. Because lots of times we need to think things through as adults. We're going to administer discipline. We want to make sure it's enough, but not too much. We want to make sure that we're not playing favorites. We want to make sure we're not doing it in anger, and that we are consistent as God is consistent. I don't believe here in this first verse Solomon was dividing parents with a proverb, because Genesis tells us husbands and wives are one flesh, and so intended to be indivisible. And we see that in the fifth commandment. You have to honor both your parents, not just father, not just mother, but both of them, because they are one flesh and they are in this child-rearing business together. Children that turn out well bless both parents, and children that turn out poorly are a concern to both parents. The word for heaviness in this first verse is kind of unique. It's grief. It's more serious than what we would think of with the word heaviness. Grief and sorrow, even depression might be part of the definition. And I have had to remind more than one parent that their children, although from God, did not come with guarantees. Wouldn't it be nice to have a label? You know, when you bring them home from the hospital, you just look at the label and you know what you got. And it'll explain, you know, the care that they need, and, you know, whether a word is enough or whether you're going to have to use corporal punishment. Even the we're going to get to it eventually. The train up a child in the way he should go, and when he is old, he will not depart from it. This is a probability, a possibility, not an ironclad promise of success. And really, let's look at it from the perspective of the parent. What perfect parent is there that can claim that they have done everything right in bringing up their child in the nurture and admonition of the Lord? Consequently, God owes them. No, it doesn't work that way. One thing parents often forget is how children can generate an enormous amount of pain or pleasure in a family. Children can create conflict, an enormous amount, which is one of the points of the proverb. Children have a big impact on their parents' happiness. I don't know if you saw that, but it's there. It's subtle, but it is there. We're talking about the happiness. A wise son makes dad glad, but a foolish son, a mother might go into depression, and of course, dad as well. You see, children are way too selfish to ever consider the stress they could be causing. They will never figure this out while they are at home. It usually takes being out. Some eventually figure it out, some never do. Usually when they become parents, a few light bulbs go on. Naturally, no sane adult would constantly allow the conduct of a child to determine the standard of happiness in the house. Some parents take their child's misbehavior, however, way too personal. Way too personal. I have heard parents say, he or she's trying to kill me. They're trying to kill me. Well, take heart. It's nothing to do with you personally. It could be any parent. If you weren't their parent, it'd be somebody else that would think they're trying to kill them. Most adolescents have no concept of the pain that they are causing. None whatsoever. Or the collateral domestic turmoil between dad and mom. They don't get that. They don't see that. It's not incomprehensible to them while they're at home. In other words, they would injure anybody living with them. Because this person, this little miniature at this point in time, this immature human being is a work in progress. And there's going to be bumps. And my advice to lots of parents has, have you ever seen any of the mafia movies where the hitman, tells his victim right before he kills him, this isn't personal. It's business. And I think parents need to have the same attitude sometimes. It personally hurts me to correct you, but you've stepped over a line. You need correcting, and this isn't personal. I'd rather not spank you, but this is business. You need to be spanked. And so they do it. They do it because that's their job. Before God, that's their job. In closing, what would you say is the biggest mistake parents make raising their children? Giving in? What did you say, Connie? Trying to be their friend. These are all really good. We can try way too hard for perfection, can't we? Anyhow, this is from a website called moms.com, and I thought they must know what they're talking about. But I looked at these, and I thought, yep, number one is enabling. Parents want to avoid teaching their children that the world revolves around them. So often, we always want, every generation wants life to be better for their children. And so many times we do too much for them, and we give them the impression that everything revolves around them, and it doesn't. Christine, isn't that the mistake you made with your firstborn, really? Yeah, you'd probably rather not talk about it now. I understand that. Being too loose with structure. You see, if we are not organized as adults, we're passing that on to our kids. If we don't make our bed every morning, we can't expect them to make the bed every morning. If we don't take out the trash, when it's time for them to start doing that, they're going to say, wait a minute, you never took it out. Why do I have to take it out? Thirdly, trying to be their best friend. This is amazing to me. You can read the Bible from Genesis to Revelation. You will never find once, even implied, that your child, A, has to like you, or B, you got to be friends. You won't find that anywhere. Because it's really not important in the long run. It is really not important. Lastly, pushing them too hard. That is seeking perfection. I personally have seen that more than others, the others. But these are all really good things to keep in mind. People are always comparing, their children to others. There's something really wrong, and forgive me if I'm offending you if you've got an honor student and a bumper sticker. Honor student on board. I saw a pretty funny caption. A father had his son out, and there's a bumper sticker that said, we're proud to have a son who is, and the rest of it was empty and blank, and the father turned to the son and he said, the rest is up to you. The rest is up to you. Most parents do not adequately model, discuss, and teach godly responsibility. That's what I would have. That's a pastor's perspective. Most parents do not adequately model, discuss, and teach godly responsibility. What is the target for your child into adulthood? What's the ideal you want them to strive to attain? And it's not to be a doctor, a lawyer, a pastor. It has nothing to do with occupation. Let me ask it another way. Who is the ideal person? You want them to be like Jesus. That's what we're striving for. And it's the same for all of us, adults as well as children. Christ-likeness. Dr. Good used to say, good person, good partner, good parent. And then you see it starts all over again. We're gonna close in prayer. Let's pray. Father, thank you for your word and thank you for the institution of family. We pray, Father, that we might understand your will and your role for each of us in our families, that we might know your hand of blessing. We thank you for the responsibility you give us, that you entrust children to our care. And we pray, Father, for wisdom and strength and courage as we carry out that biblical discipline and nurturing that you desire. We pray now your blessing as we meditate upon the truth of your word, for it's in your Son's name we ask it. Amen. For the next little bit, we're going to be praying here in the sanctuary and down the hall. And if you are at home watching, we would ask you to make a list of some things on your heart and mind. And maybe your family should be at the top of that list tonight. And that you'll spend some time in prayer as we do as well. Thanks for joining us tonight.